So comics is special to me because it's this amazing genre that combines images and words. And actually, you know, it doesn't even necessarily have to have the words, but I don't even know how to express how exciting that is to me because it opens up so many possibilities. You know, you can be an amazing, really highly skilled artist, or you can be someone that has never drawn in their life. It's a way of telling stories, and it's incredibly accessible both to do, but I think incredibly accessible to read as well. And whether we like it or not, we live in a very visually biased culture. I saw a really cool fact the other day about 80% of our brain power is used processing the information that comes through our eyes. You know, it's a huge part of the brain compared to smell or hearing or touch. And, you know, I find that fascinating because if that's true, you know, comics should be everywhere. It's such a great way to express things. And, you know, perhaps because it is quite a time-consuming medium sometimes, that it's such a powerful way to simplify and tell stories. Even looking at cave paintings that were done thousands of years ago, to me they almost look like comics. They're telling a story through image, and we're almost hardwired for that, I think. And it's that act of storytelling that builds empathy, it crosses bridges, it helps people understand things that are probably quite important. It affects us physically as well. You read or watch something scary, for example, you feel scared, you physically have that reaction. And that's the power of story. You know, even though there's no danger in the room while you're reading that comic, it's still giving you those chills. To me, that's an example of how it builds empathy as well. It's how we can walk a mile in someone else's shoes, understand things that we maybe didn't see before.
I mean, like for my comic book, it's 20 pages, standard American size. You can tell the shortest story in a very short form and keep it really interesting in comic books. And you keep people excited with visuals and everything. I think it's the best way. If you want to either teach kids or you want to tell a story of what's going on. I mean, you can't tell somebody about Great Depression and money issues in the world and about gangs by just writing a book that kids have to read with no graphics. So comic books are really effective in highlighting or touching on really important points in a very indirect way, in a very short time, using all the visuals and superheroes and stuff like that, which everybody, when you grow up, I mean, most kids really want to be superheroes. Like, if you ask most kids, they'll be like, oh yeah, when I grew up, I wanted to fly like Superman, you know? So it's a very effective way to tell a story in a very short time and effectively.
Comics has images and it has text and it has ways of suggesting pacing, ways of suggesting sound, like the different shape of a speech bubble, or the distance it's placed from a character's mouth, the length of the tail, the kind of font, the sound effects going on. It's suggesting like a lot of stuff to a lot of different like senses in the same way that like a film would. But unlike in a film, you are reading it at your own pace. It's something that you can read really, really fast, just reading the words, or you can take your time over. So there's kind of more space for interpretation, I think. Even just the ability to like flick back and look at something else. I think in physical comics, that's like a really interesting extra dimension. I also think that it's very easy to go inside a character, right? You can have a narrative voice, you can have thought bubbles, you can have, obviously something I use a lot in my webcomic is like flashbacks, where it becomes really clear that you're seeing everything from a particular character's point of view sometimes, rather than like an objective truth. I think that's something really interesting that can be done in comics. And I think that it kind of makes them, I mean, good not just for telling fantastical action if you're having like a fight sequence with a dragon. The current comic I'm doing is historical, so unlike in a filmed period drama where you would need a huge team and enormous budget, it's something where I can basically do almost everything like myself. I'm obviously getting a lot of support from publishers, but it's not a really big team collaborative project. And also I'm not restricted by like, well, where can you film, what actors can you get, and all of that stuff. Kind of have, I think uniquely comics, you might have a very few people having a lot of creative control. Again, even animation, probably to do a long form animation, you have a million people involved. I think there's so much interesting stuff there, and that as a reader, you're probably picking up on without always noticing. And obviously as someone who writes like romance, but also about people's personal things, like feelings about like gender identity and stuff, I think that you can show that like internal stuff really well. I think that's why there's a lot of autobio comics that are talking about really difficult things, is that sometimes like just writing in words like, this was the worst day of my life, like this was really sad, this made me feel awful, like doesn't really say something in the same way that like lots of like abstract shapes and like expressions and a lot of stuff I think can get that across in a very visceral way that some people like might not necessarily get from just text?
I think this is going to be quite a quick one for me. Just like the marrying of art and story, like the art and story marrying together, like a movie, but like it's really quick and easy to do. You can do it yourself. I think that's why. I mean, like because I like a lot of mediums and like I sort of flirted towards it. I'm not really one of those comics the greatest medium of all time people. Like that's not really. Yeah, I'm not really like that kind of person. I'm just like comics are neat. Think the art working in tandem with the storytelling is really effective, and that's what is great about it.
I think I sort of said it earlier. I think it's that intimacy you have with the reader. One of those things that you just sort of take for granted, and especially the more you read them, the more you understand how they work, and the more your level of sophistication grows with them. I think, you know, like we were talking with all those other books from Myriad, they're so different and yet they're so easily understood by the reader. And I think it's that you can present such different looks and styles and genres, but there's a way that people just naturally kind of understand it, you know, and it can cross language barriers as well. You know, I have a lot of translated books. I've got a lot of self-made hero that have come through Europe comics, and then things like I'm really into sort of Taiyo Matsumoto. I read Go-Go Monster when I was making Barking and found that really affecting. I love it for that you can have this, like we were saying before about traveling the world, you can have this slice of life and this sort of difference of opinion or this fantastical tale. And even though you've had no experience of it in your own life in reality, you can feel fully immersed in that world and that place. You know, I think it has that unique capability for storytelling. But also the pagination, so the page turns, like what you can do with those kind of wonderful beats when you turn a page and you're like, there's a shock. I love that side of it. There's really interesting kind of academic on all of that. Like Neil Cohn, he talks about the kind of sophistication of comics language and how manga has changed Western comics and how, you know, the symbolism that you can use and the language and that wonderful kind of interplay of how they affect each other and different visually, different story, different way of telling a story. And I think that's what I love about it. You don't have to be stuck in a way of doing it. It's not like 3-act structures or whatever. You can just do whatever you like with it and tell that story however it needs to be told.
Well, I mean, it's individual to each comic what the kind of narrative is and how effective it's going to be. But as a form of storytelling, I love comics for like a million reasons, but I love how stylized comics are. I like the sense of identity. It hits you as soon as you open the page. There is so much about this telling you what's happening, from the lettering, from the colouring, from like all of the roles in creating comics are so integral to create this beautiful whole that is so much more than the sum of its parts. I love the sense of self you get from the fact that you're deciding what happens in between those panels. Like, I think that comics are such an active form of creation and building, and I'm really into interactive art. I'm into art that, you know, demands you to engage with it in some level. It's a narrative that demands of you something that makes you engage with it, and I feel like with comics you have to interact, and it encourages you to see yourself in the spaces. You know, you kind of sit in the gutter, and I just love the fact that the narratives are often really different. I love the fact that like so many comics feel punk in the sense of like they're not trying to appeal to this wider understanding of what literature is, so it can take risks, it can break walls. There's an academic paper by Erin LaCour called Comics as a Minor Literature, and she kind of just sets out this idea that like comics don't give a f*** what you think about them, as that's me being paraphrasing aggressively here and not capturing at all any of her argument, but this idea of like it doesn't care about where it sits, it exists out with this binary of like high art, low art, it's over here. I love that about comics. I think that there's so much freedom. It's not showboating. It's just, you know, it's authentic in a way that I love. I'm a massive fan of comics.
It's like, I feel like obviously it's such a visual medium, so it means that you can really like it's so different to prose. Like you can see what's going on, and it can be really good for reluctant readers as well. But I think like my favorite thing about like comics and storytelling and stuff, you can like draw expressions and stuff to help. There's so much like show don't tell with comics, which I think is really neat. And also I just think there's so much visual comedy that you can do in comics. Some of like my favorite comic, like Casey Green does like, so his like comedic timing, and like the expressions just absolutely make his comics for me. You can get so weird and wonderful with your comics. You just draw whatever. I mean, assuming that like the publisher's on board, or you know, whoever you're collaborating's on board, but you can just get really wild and wonderful, and you can get what you want like across really clearly. Like you can get it on the page, and I think that's really neat. I think that's really cool. That's the other thing as well, is like I feel like you get so much out of like a second read of a book. I spend a really long time reading comics because like kind of poring over every page. Like I don't think that's like how you're the eyes probably wants you to enjoy your comic, by just like really intensely going over stuff. But I definitely like for a second read through it, I want to like catch everything. Like you can put like so many tiny little details and stuff, and so many like extra gags and funny little moments, or stuff that just bolsters the story like up in the background, and just like there's so many different ways to tuck little details in through comics, which I absolutely love doing, and I love seeing it.
Comics are a great form of storytelling simply because that they are that combination of words and images, so that in some way they are still able to speak to many, many different types of people who process things in different ways. Some people like to see things much more visually, some people prefer to sort of read words, whereas that combination of both words and image together, they sort of like, they don't tell you what is literally happening, but they can also give off a sense of atmosphere and a feeling of an underlying kind of like tension, or like a feeling of calm, and so on. Comics have an interesting way of doing that, and they are super accessible because comics, they have, particularly now, if you just get a cheap sort of black and white manga, they're not going to be expensive. You don't need to have any special equipment to be able to watch it or whatever. You can just pick up a book, read it, and you can pick it up wherever you left off. You can dip into just a section if you would like. They are also a great way for you to hone your own sort of skills, or if you get really into a character or get really into the artwork, it's great to just have that open and see whether or not you can try copy drawing that character. So it's like, in a way, you can interact with it much more easily than with some other like storytelling mediums.
Comics have the ability to tell stories in ways which other media cannot, and it is literally that simple. So if a person can draw an idea that they have, if they can convey that idea to countless readers, that is like magical. That is like mad skills. Filmmakers are limited by whatever technology is available. Writers are limited by whatever words are available. But comic book creators, to me, are limited literally by their imagination and nothing else. Not even by their skill, I don't think, because people can draw in such a range, diverse range of ways. So I think that's really, really special. So once that imagination is on paper, I think the other thing that makes comics so effective is the way that readers engage with them. So the storytelling isn't just about the creator and the product that they make, but it's about the readers. And this links with my own research in the way that readers can understand, for my example, a difficult biblical story better through reading a comic book than they can by reading the Bible itself. So one of the reasons that they can understand difficult concepts better with comics is because readers become part of the stories themselves. And this is not a new idea. Anybody who's done Comics Theory 101 will know this. But it's still so exciting to me that readers have to play a part in allowing the story to continue. They have to fill in the gaps or the gutters between the panels. It is the reader who creates the link between Clark Kent in the phone box and Superman leaving the phone box in the next panel. The reader is the first person to know that Clark Kent and Superman are the same person, even though they weren't told, in a literary way. And that's because of the way that comics are made. So the reader has to figure it themselves and they become part of the story. And that's why I love comics as a mode of storytelling. They are this three-way conversation between the creator, the character, and the reader. And there is no other media in the world which currently exists which can accomplish that. I think it's really special.